What's up, guys? Coming at you from Shenzhen in a corner of a small room. I wanted to film this video on my balcony as I usually do, but there's a ton of construction noise going on outside in the neighboring building. So, okay, I thought I'd come in and do this because I put this video off for too long. This is a video about some recaps, some highlights from my interview with Rushan Abbas, plus some updates on information that was uncovered after the interview. I wanted to do this a while ago, but I ended up losing my voice for a few days after that interview. Perhaps the interview left me so speechless that I literally lost my voice. But I'm almost fully recovered, so I wanted to put this video together. I actually made one a couple of days ago, and there were so many contradictions, there were so many things to cover that it ended up being longer than the original interview, and I thought, no, well, we can't do this. So I was too worn out to re-record it. After realizing how long it was. I'm going to try my best to keep this as short as possible and just hit some of the key points here. So here we go. For those of you who don't know, didn't see the live stream, or didn't look at the video after the live stream, Rushan Abbas is she's Uyghur from Xinjiang, went to university in Xinjiang before moving to the US. When she moved to the US, she ended up finally working for Radio Free Asia in the 90s, a propaganda outlet for the US government, worked in Guantanamo Bay, helping to facilitate the interrogation of Uyghur prisoners with her translation services, and worked for the military-industrial complex. She now, of course, says that her sister is also missing, no longer in contact with her, and her assumption is that she's in a concentration camp in China. So right out of the gate, Rushan accused me of supporting a genocide by donating my YouTube super chats to the China Poverty Alleviation Fund, which she claims is a front for genocide. To give you a bit of a background information on the China Poverty Alleviation Fund, it's a non-governmental organization that works with big international brands to help lift children and families out of poverty. They do stuff in Africa, Asia, Central America. This organization has hundreds of projects ranging from educational support, maternal and infant healthcare, and village infrastructure projects. And I want to be clear about something here. I was under no obligation at any point to donate the proceeds from my live stream super chats to anything. I could have kept it myself just like every other YouTuber does. But I felt like I just didn't feel comfortable taking those funds when we were talking about Rushan's activism and about her sister. So I decided to choose a charity. And we didn't get too much that came in. I think it was just over 100, I'm not sure if this is after YouTube's deductions, but it was like 130, 140 US dollars or something like that. Still, it's better than nothing, right? After our chat, I did, however, want to find out a little bit more. So I asked her if she could provide evidence for her claim, but like all of her other claims, she couldn't provide anything. I asked her in private first, through a direct message on Twitter. Then I went into posting it publicly saying, hey, come on, this is a big accusation. Can you help us clear it up? She didn't make any attempt to provide anything and called the effort to ask for evidence pathetic. She ended up reporting my tweets for being targeted harassment also, and my account was actually suspended for a short period of time, but through an appeals process, it was very, very obvious it was not targeted harassment, even in the slightest way. So I got my Twitter account back. Now, if you notice in my discussion, moving on to the discussion itself, if you notice in my discussion with Rushan, I didn't focus too much on the claims of genocide because there's nothing substantial to back this up, and I've engaged with these claims a lot before, especially on Twitter. There's no mass exodus of Uyghurs, and the population is increasing. I've looked through and I've listened to countless people pushing this narrative, and it always ends up lackluster or littered with dishonesty. And as soon as you see people talking about China's terrorism problem, and they put terrorism in quotations, I mean, you know they're being really, really intellectually dishonest. There are literally Taliban training camps for Uyghur activists interested to go. And I'm going to get back into that point a little bit more later on. I also listened to one of the journalists who uncovered some of the leaked Chinese documents that they rely on, and her name was Bethany Allen Ibrahim. And this is something I listened to a while ago. It's not that Rushan said, oh, there's leaked Chinese documents, and I went out and looked for it. I've been looking at this stuff all along. And I listened to her on a podcast. She said her source was overseas Uyghur groups. These are the same Uyghur groups that have been funded over $8 million from the NED alone. And there's funds from other US organizations as well, governmental organizations no less. Furthermore, when this Bethany journalist translated the bits that were basically more or less talking about how some of these Uyghurs talk about infidels, she wanted to soften the language. And she said, well, infidel is such a strong language. I'd rather translate it as, I can't remember the word she used, but basically she was really trying to soften it. Now, on the flip side, when she was talking about the Kunming train attacks where people were chopped up with knives, she said, yeah, it was terrible, it was wrong, but I think they kind of used too strong language to describe it. They blew it out of proportion. I mean, she comes across as a total terrorist apologist, like a lot of them do, but obviously doing it in a very delicate way. So I moved into a stage where I wanted to find out the true motivations and backgrounds of the loudest voices pushing these unsubstantiated claims. And we should have done this for the testimony in 1990 with the Kuwaiti girl, but can you imagine being the person then calling that 15-year-old girl crying on stage a liar or questioning her intentions? You're not going to make yourself many fans, but what that event taught us is that you must demand for real evidence and you must consider the big picture. If someone ended up uncovering at that time that she was involved in a $12 million campaign organized by a PR firm, Hill and Knowlton, we would have said, hang on a sec, guys. Well, at least we should have. Who knows? Maybe people still would have been saying, what are you talking about? You're trying to discredit her. Because that's essentially what's happening today. We're saying, hold on a second. You're funded this much by this group, and we're not asking the questions now. And so that's why it happens over and over again, from the WMD story to the recent silencing of Jose Bustani, the ex-chief of the OPCW, the Organization of the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, when he wanted to talk about his concerns about the validity of the so-called chemical weapon attack by Assad in his own country in 2018, when he was saying, this doesn't make sense. He was silenced. Now, of course, the U.S. is in Syria protecting the oil, as Trump likes to say.
And then they say he left troops in Syria. You know what I did? I left troops to take the oil. I took the oil. The only troops I have are taking the oil. They're protecting the oil. I took over.
We're taking the oil. We're not taking
well,
the oil.
maybe we will. Maybe we won't.
They're protecting the facility.
I don't know. Maybe we should take it. But we have the oil. Right now, the United States has the oil. So they say he left troops in Syria. No. I got rid of all of them other than we're protecting the oil. We have the oil.
All right, so even if you think the narrative in Xinjiang is true, you need to ask questions, you need to look at the sources, and you need to be honest about the problematic connections linked to the very same kind of forces that have tricked you in very similar ways before. But I've gone off on a little bit of a tangent here. Let's get back on track and talk about some of the content in the interview itself. In regards to Rushan and her claim that I asked her if she was paid for her work at Guantanamo Bay and that she didn't bring up needing to support her family in the context of taking that job. In the interview, she invited me to share the screenshots during our discussion, and I've posted them on Twitter already. I will share the link below, and you can determine whose events it more closely matches. Towards the end of the interview, she didn't give me much of an opportunity to ask more questions about her involvement with the military-industrial complex, specifically having worked for L3. The only thing she briefly said was that she didn't know what they did. And I found that really hard to believe because when you open up their website, it's literally plastered with images and descriptions of how they supply military parts and battlefield training. She ended up later clarifying this point with me, and she said, well, actually, she was hired by Titan Corporation, which was later bought out by L3 while she was working there. It checks out. It's true. I mean, the story checks out, but it's actually even worse. Lockheed Martin was in the process of trying to buy that company when she was being hired, which should have given anyone a pretty good indication about what they're really about. But perhaps even worse than that, Titan Corporation was implicated in the torture of Muslims in Abu Ghraib. This is the part of her life she says she's proud of, helping interrogate Uyghur prisoners on behalf of the US military while working for a company that was also torturing Muslims in Abu Ghraib. And then she has the nerve in her chat with me to suggest that I'm immoral for making beer in China. I mean, what a stretch. Rushan, in regards to Guantanamo Bay, Rushan was actually trying to paint herself as someone who was driven to Guantanamo Bay out of a passion to help those poor prisoners. Her description of her motives has constantly changed over the years, and you can have a listen to this video.
It was early April 2002. My phone rang, and when I answered, it was a major from one of the contractors providing language support for Guantanamo. And then he asked, have you heard of Uyghurs being caught in Afghanistan and brought over to Guantanamo? And I said, yes. I need you to go to Guantanamo and translate for those Uyghurs. And I was shocked, actually. I didn't know what to say. But then I decided to go for it. I decided to go and serve my country when the country needed my service.
So basically, she was driven to Guantanamo Bay out of a desire to serve her country, meaning America now, of course, when she talks about her country. Moving on, I asked Rushan about her sister. Now, I asked her, why did her sister keep going back to China after visiting her in the US so many times, if the situation was so bad? It was after that point she became very vested in a narrative saying that the situation didn't turn bad until after her last visit in 2016. And this made me curious about why she felt the need to work for an anti-China news network in the late 90s, the USAGM Radio Free Asia, which they themselves have said they use as it's American soft power that's cheaper than the military. She said it was to bring the real news of Xinjiang to the people. So I was curious then. I asked her, well, then during your time as a journalist bringing the real news of Xinjiang to the people, did you write anything positive about Xinjiang? And then she said, well, my focus wasn't really Xinjiang, so I didn't get a clear answer on that. Back to the where I'm getting at with asking about her sister continually going back. Rushan, before that point, had actually said that the Uyghurs were massacred in 1990, experienced brutal oppression in 1997, and then their religion was used to persecute them in a more widespread manner after 9/11 in 2001. And she said she'd characterize what was going on at the time as a massacre, or a genocide, actually. She used the word genocide. And yet she also said that her sister kept going back after 3 visits to the US because the situation wasn't bad until after 2016. The whole narrative is contradicting itself. I then also brought up a video of Rushan from 10 years ago. I didn't play the video during our conversation, but I was asking about when she seemed, because in that video she seemed really upset and disappointed that Guantanamo Bay was not closing. And let me just play that video for you now. It's about 2 minutes long.
The men always say that they had so much faith and trust in the United States government, but turned out to be that was not what they expected, and they were disappointed. I was too. I was disappointed in the legal system in U.S. and the constitution we have in this great country, how our forefathers built this country based on what values. What happened in Guantanamo was not what I understood of the Constitution. I often think that what if forefathers, they know what's happening today in Guantanamo, how they feel about this. But and I always have my faith and trust in the government that they are going to correct this mistake and do the right thing, especially when President Obama came to the office almost like next day. He announced that he was going to shut down Guantanamo within 1 year. And I was so excited, I had tears in my eyes. Finally it's going to be corrected. Everybody makes mistakes, but the most important thing is who's willing to correct that mistake. But now we are approaching that deadline in a couple of weeks, and it's not going to happen. So those are the kind of things disappoints me, and I guess my 20 years in the United States, I always want to see the great side of the United States. But then last 8 years, what I have endured, what I have experienced in Guantanamo was not the side that I want to see of my country here.
All right, so she doesn't speak this way anymore. She talks about how proud she was of her work and doesn't really speak up about Guantanamo Bay in the context of being a terrible place that needs to be closed down. She says that this isn't her focus and that she has something more important to talk about. But I think, and you guys can disagree with me if you want, but I think it's pretty problematic that she participated personally in the Guantanamo Bay economy and as an activist, but this doesn't make her list of things to talk about. Of course, we've got to keep in mind that the new organization that she's founded is now funded by the US government, by the NED, so I'm not sure if she would be putting her funding at risk if she did add Guantanamo Bay to the list of things she cares to speak up about. And when I asked her about this, she deflected to the issue of me having a business in China making beer, which is, again, quite a remarkable stretch to represent it as anything anywhere remotely close to her situation. But one of the most remarkable statements out of the whole thing from Rushan, in my opinion again, was when she was defending her NED funding by asking me, well, what does NED stand for? Stands for the National Endowment for Democracy. So he says, you see, it stands for democracy because democracy is in the name. This is, of course, far from the truth. They don't care about democracy. They'll install a dictator into a foreign country as long as it means they'll be friendly to American foreign policy and corporate interests. Alan Weinstein, the founder of NED, even said in that regards, a lot of what we do today was covertly done by the CIA 25 years ago. And of course, speaking about what the NED does. This is an organization that actively destabilizes governments, democratically elected as well, all around the world by interfering with their politics and funding rebellions. The same thing America goes into a panic attack about when they think it's being done to them. Personally, I don't believe that Rushan is really truly ignorant about what the NED does and what their goals are. I think she's just pretending to be. I also went into a little bit more detail with her, talking about the motives of the funding that she gets. And I mentioned also Lawrence Wilkerson, the retired United States Army colonel and former Chief of Staff to the United States Secretary of State Colin Powell. And he said the United States has an incentive to destabilize China through Xinjiang and to use the Uyghurs when doing so. False flag events or using activists to excuse future aggressions is something we should all be alert about. This is why the conversation, my conversation was really about finding out what her motives are and connections when she's doing her activisms. Inventing events is something the United States does, from the Gulf of Tonkin to the weapons of mass destruction lies and beyond. Hiring activists like they did with the testimony in 1990, where the girl said, Iraqi soldiers were throwing babies from incubators and letting them die on the floor. This is something that they do. And now, here we are. We're faced with a situation where there's no evidence of a genocide. None of the refugee camps in the bordering countries are overflowing with people trying to escape mass extermination. The population is going up, and the government has funded at least $8 million in Uyghur activist groups since 2004. Again, just through the NED. There's other organizations also. And Rushan's organization is now one of them as well. So when you take that into consideration, and the U.S. has an incentive to destabilize China from within Xinjiang, both to offset China's economy slowly exceeding that, or looking like it's on track to exceed that of the US's, and to disrupt key areas of the Belt and Road Initiative, you've got every reason to be skeptical about what's going on as well. This is why when Rushan tried to compare a supposed genocide in Xinjiang to Nazi Germany, despite no one trying to escape, she said we should always remember the phrase, never again. And I told her that never again should also be used to represent never being fooled by American propaganda again to excuse their aggressions and killing of innocent people in their endless wars. But I didn't get too much enthusiasm from Rushan on this never again, because it is, of course, she's of course being funded by the same groups that are trying to do it again and who have done that over and over again. Now, moving on to the claim, I think it's important to talk about the scale of what's going on too, because China has shown to the world, they've invited people in from all different kinds of organizations to show what are they doing to deal with the terrorism problem? How are they handling it? The kinds of skills, training programs, and de-radicalization efforts that they're doing actually puts America to shame. When you compare how America deals with Uyghur separatist groups, in as late as 2018, America has been killing Chinese Uyghur terrorists in Afghanistan. And I'll play a video for you from that 2018 press conference now.
Over the past weekend, United States forces conducted air operations to strike Taliban and East Turkestan Islamic Movement, or ETIM, training facilities in Badakhshan province. The destruction of these training facilities prevent terrorists from planning any acts near the border with China and Tajikistan. The strikes also destroyed stolen Afghan National Army vehicles and the process of being converted to vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices. One brief note on ETIM, which I just mentioned. They are a terrorist organization that operates in China and the border regions of Afghanistan. ETIM enjoys support from the Taliban in the mountains of Badakhshan. So hitting these Taliban training facilities and squeezing the Taliban support networks degrades ETIM capabilities. What I'd like to do is show you a couple videos of strikes in this area in Badakhshan. The first one that you're going to see is a B-52 strike on a Taliban training camp in Badakhshan. Adrian, can you please roll the tape? This strike occurred on 4 February.
All right, so that's how America handles these people. There's no de-radicalization efforts. There's no skills training. There's no having a discussion. That's what they do. And according to Rushan, they don't, in Guantanamo Bay, they also don't have any de-radicalization efforts or programs, no skills training programs in Guantanamo Bay either, to prepare these people for life when they finally end up leaving after years and years and years of being locked up. So to tie this into a more important point, what we've got here, there's no real evidence to support that there's actually a genocide going on. But even, there's no evidence to even support the idea that 20% of the population, or 3 million people, as Rushan said, is being housed, fed, and detained. Imagine how much that would cost also in these kinds of centers. The claim is absolutely ridiculous. And if you look at, though, the little effort that actually is going on in China, is the perfect thing for a U.S. propagandist to jump on top of and represent it as something that it's not, or something that's far worse than it really is. I mean, it's a dream come true. It's a way to villainize China, potentially prepare people for a conflict with China, and detract from the actual, verifiable, terrible ways that the U.S. treats Muslims around the world, through companies like the ones that Rushan worked for, no less. Going back to Rushan's sister's story again, in my personal opinion, it is highly likely that she is actually in detention. I don't know how connected she was to her sister's work, but I don't know. I also think it's entirely possible that she either has voluntarily or has been ordered not to contact her overseas family anymore. Whatever the case may be, I absolutely think that it has something to do directly with Rushan's work. She checked off all of the possible boxes she could to put her family at risk. She worked for the American military-industrial complex. She worked as an American propagandist for Radio Free Asia. She was a Xinjiang separatist, always referring to Xinjiang as East Turkestan. She's connected to the people who have been blamed, or at least have been accused, for encouraging the riots in Xinjiang that killed many people. And she's funded by the NED, an extension of the CIA. Rushan did not seem to empathize with the possibility or take responsibility for what she has been doing in that regard, or how it could even remotely be connected. She basically says it doesn't make sense. And what I tried to explain to her is, if you look at this in the opposite direction, if you look at if an American had a sibling who moved to Beijing and was working with an organization that was specifically designed to interfere with American politicians and fund rebel or separatist groups in the U.S., and that the American sibling kept going over to Beijing to meet their sibling, that would absolutely 100% put that person in America at risk. And I'd go as far as calling the Beijing-based sibling immoral, irresponsible, and selfish. Now, for you guys to understand how problematic I am, maybe some of you guys don't empathize with how problematic I think the NED's efforts are. So I want to play a clip for you. The first part is from Max Blumenthal's documentary on the NED, and then the second part is from a YouTube channel called Renegade Cut. I will put the link to all of those videos in the description so you can check out the full thing for yourself, if you so wish. So let's have a listen now.
The NED's first success was the defeat of the Sandinista government in Nicaragua's 1990 elections, replacing it with the right-wing party of Violeta Chamorro. Since then, the NED has advanced U.S. interests in countless countries. It helped swing a Russian election for Boris Yeltsin in 1996. It drove a failed coup attempt in Venezuela in 2002. It orchestrated a successful one in Haiti in 2004, and another one in Ukraine in 2014, which paved the way for neo-Nazis to move into the political mainstream.
The system of global capitalism is not simply the natural outcome of markets. When a head of state or head of government is elected or assumes power in the global south, that ruler faces a secondary challenge outside of the governance of the people. They must also capitulate to the global north, endorse capitalism, and maintain the current unequal economic relationship and trade deals. If they do not, there is a good chance that this ruler or regime will be overthrown, either directly by or with some assistance from rich nations. most prominently the United States. In 1954, the United States assisted in regime change in Guatemala. President Jacobo Arbenz threatened holdings of U.S.-owned United Fruit Company. The CIA equipped paramilitary troops, and the U.S. Navy blockaded the coast. The president was removed from power, leaving the nation run by a succession of military juntas. In 1960, the United States and Belgium ousted Congo's Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba. Belgium wanted to maintain its business interests in the region after decolonization. Lumumba was killed in 1961. In 1964, the United States helped oust Brazilian President João Goulart, whose left-wing politics threatened capitalism. In 1973, the United States backed a military coup against democratically elected President Salvador Allende, who was a socialist, in favor of the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet, a fascist capitalist who was responsible for countless atrocities. There are a great many.
So there you have it. That's what these groups do. And Rushan tried to say, in regards to her sister, that her involvement with the NED didn't start until after her sister was detained. She's talking about the grants that she has for her own company or own group that she's opened now. But I don't think she realized that I actually uncovered before our interview a deleted archived webpage that showed she was working at the Uyghur American Association in 2006 and was elected as the director of communications. This is an organization that is also funded by the NED. They were receiving well over $100,000 alone. They had $280,000 grant in 2016 and had additional funding for their other programs also. One of the grants was just before she was hired also, and it was specifically to hire more people for their organization. She didn't really address this other than trying to say it was a voluntary position after stumbling and repeating the talking points that the D in NED stands for democracy again. Other than this, I uncovered some other pretty problematic stuff after our interview. There was an Al Jazeera documentary made on Guantanamo Bay that Rushan Abbas took part in, but it was since taken down. Someone had a saved copy in their Dropbox, so they shared it with me, and I looked through it. I want to share a small clip from that for you now.
Şunun bilen bir gün yana sorakka ep çıkkan boldu mene. Çıksam aldımda harbiy kiyim bilen bir ayal oturuptu. Ben bunu qarap hamda bir qarap Uyg'ur qo'shilma bir aqab bu da oyoq yo'qdi.
Bu çataq yo'q. Xitoy bizning dushmanimiz, sizlarning dushmanlarga bizlarga yordam beramiz. Vatanni ozod qilgan yordamni xotirjam bo'l, mana ochiq so'zlar dedi. Bo'ldi deb o'ngizkim biz ham meni aniq dedik.
İşte so'rashlar biz ko'rishimiz, nemishqa biz bo'lib qoldik, qachon bizni qo'yib berdi. Ya bular bilan bizning adovatimiz bo'lmasa, ya bular bilan biz bu urush banda qilmoqan tursa.
Okay, so as you can hear, these Uyghurs were absolutely at war with China, and they were released from Guantanamo Bay because they were not a threat to the US. To China, on the other hand, that's a different story. After watching that documentary, I searched for the documents related to these prisoners, and I found out that their statements included admitting that they were trained in camps set up by the Taliban, specifically designed to train Uyghur terrorists, and they were taught how to use AK-47s. This is stuff that Rushan would have known. She was the translator. So when she played down the issue of terrorism and the ETIM, it looks like it was absolutely an act. Had these men been able to get back in China with their weapons, they would have almost certainly committed terror attacks, much like the previous ones China experienced. But this time, instead of chopping innocent people up like they did in Kunming train station and other places, they would have had fully automatic machine guns to mow crowds of people down with. In that documentary, they really brush over all of these details. This is probably why they didn't show the full document, and I had to go and find it afterwards. And Rushan tries to paint these people who were mistakenly identified as terrorists. They are absolutely terrorists, or if you don't want to go that far, you can say at least they were trained by terrorists by bare minimum, and you can figure out what that means for yourself thereafter. And they're also Xinjiang separatists. Again, had these people managed to get back into China after their training was complete, judging by their previous terror attacks, they would have killed innocent civilians, Uyghurs included, just like the previous times. Uyghurs like her sister, who was still located in Xinjiang. You gotta let that sink in a little bit for yourself. This is scary stuff, but I want to move on to something that I guess you could call it more entertaining, so to speak, as awkward of a transition that may be from something so heavy as what we were talking about just now. But I had a non-Uyghur, it's a white American activist for Xinjiang, contact me, and she made a video about me cursing and swearing, seemingly upset about my what my interview with Rushan exposed. I got into a bit of a conversation with this person, and I was fascinated by how unfazed they were by the problematic nature of the NED. After a long conversation, I actually wanted to make a joke and ask if she was trying to shill for a job with the NED, but then I finally uncovered that she was already connected to the NED. Not only that, she was from Rushan's organization. Julie is the communications director for Campaign for Uyghurs, and she tried to represent herself as someone. When you look through her profile, actually, I started looking her up afterwards because I was fascinated. And she always tries to represent herself as someone who lived in Xinjiang without actually saying it directly. She was trying to paint herself as someone who lived in a highly populated area, highly populated with Uyghurs who were being systematically targeted. And she also said that she personally witnessed atrocities. So when I pushed her about these atrocities that she witnessed, she said that she was once personally assaulted by a police officer. And another time there was a police officer walking around taking away all the Uyghur passports, and she was mistaken as a Uyghur. When I ended up pushing for more information about this, this is what happened. Let's have a read of these tweets here. All right, so she's talking about, she starts off talking about the atrocities she witnessed. She said, when a Chinese police officer tried to confiscate our passport because they thought we were Uyghurs, I dared to ask why. His mistake. And I said, okay, so they saw you holding a passport and they wanted to take it away from you? My husband looks Uyghur and my hair used to be black, so we got lots of mistaken identity. That's how we heard there was even racial prejudice against Uyghurs. It's easy to deny something you haven't personally experienced, unfortunately, so I'm thankful it happened. I said, all right, so they came to your home to get your passport? Or were you out on the streets and they think Uyghurs walk around with passports all day long? And they said, was in the airport, good sir. Foreigners are supposed to carry a copy at all times, FYI. I said, but that's, because that's irrelevant. So I said, they didn't think you were a foreigner. What made them think you were flying international? And why would you have had your passport with you? Because when you fly domestic in China as a Chinese, you use your ID card, you don't use your passport. And she says, I guess you didn't get it. They thought we were Uyghur, as stated. LOL. I said, okay, I guess you didn't get it. Uyghurs don't need to use their passports when they fly domestic. Why did they think you had your passports on you? So she says, okay, here we go. International flight desk, they probably made a logical inference that we were going abroad. And we also had them out, so... This is like, I mean, there's so many problems with the story here. Like, why wouldn't they get them when they're booking the ticket then, if they don't want them to travel abroad? This is like messed up. But anyway, so I said, so you had your blue-colored American passport out, and they asked you to hand it over because they thought it was a Chinese passport. Keep in mind, guys, the Chinese passport is red. Nope, my husband's is not blue, so he made an assumption, my dear. This story is on several things I have published, my dear. You can have a look. And I said, well, why would they need to make an assumption if your passport was already out, like you said? No response. I didn't get any response after that, and then I posted a picture of what a U.S. passport looks like up against a Chinese passport. So that was pretty good, and then she ended up making a number of other claims that aren't worth mentioning, but they all seemed really fishy, and she didn't want to provide evidence for any of it. It was always a chase, trying to explain why she wouldn't provide any evidence. Julie actually did a really good job of wiping out all of her old social media history before she started working with this NED organization. She deleted all of her old tweets, and she changed her Twitter ID, but I finally managed to find an old blog of hers. I'm not sure if she forgot about it or lost the password to it. It's not in the exact same name, so it was very difficult to find because it doesn't use her full name. It used Jules in China or something like that. It didn't have her name written anywhere. But it's filled with stuff from her complaining about visa rules, her mother-in-law, and a bunch of other superficial stuff. And here's what I found. She never once wrote about any atrocities she saw. These are new stories that she began speaking about only after her involvement with the NED. She never once wrote about Uyghurs. She wasn't even living in Xinjiang. She was living in Inner Mongolia. And she never spoke about being assaulted by a police officer. What she did, however, blog about was when she was arrested for assaulting someone in Hong Kong. She punched a Hong Konger in the face, and she spent a few nights in jail and received a suspended prison sentence for it. So I hope some of you guys who saw my interview with Rushan remember when I asked her about why is this Xinjiang narrative being supported by so many compulsive liars. You can now really further understand what I'm talking about. Rushan herself is hiring compulsive liars like this who are also violent criminals, no less. Now, I'm going to tell you guys what's going on here and why the NED is involved. They're not involved for democracy. They're here to do exactly what they did with every other place they have entered, to disrupt the local society, encourage regime change, and promote conflict to destabilize a country. In this case, it's China, a country set to become the largest economy on Earth. And maybe some of you guys out there know this and are okay with this from a personal point of view because you want to contain China even if it means lying about something. But from my personal point of view, we desperately need change. America has not been a good custodian of global power. If you really want to believe the Chinese oppression stories, America oppresses not only their own people, but the people of the world and is one of the most violent and brutal forces on our planet. I don't hope that China or any other individual country holds the same kind of global power that America does, but it's high time to ask for a little bit of diversity, fragmentation of power, in a world where America doesn't rule for the sole purpose of enriching their elite. If they're successful in destabilizing Xinjiang, Xinjiang will not only no longer be the most prosperous area in the region, it will also descend into chaos and terrorism, just like almost everywhere else America has gone recently. I'm reminded of a video where Angelina Jolie was walking through an Iraqi neighborhood after a battle, saying that these people have lost everything. They're homeless, and their homes were in rubbles. And she also said they can smell the rotting bodies of their family members under the rubble. But now they've been freed. They're happy. At least they're free. And she didn't mean this sarcastically. She really believed in her American propaganda so much that her superficial American propaganda-based understanding of the word freedom was not even shaken, even just a bit, by the smell of rotting flesh. And you guys can look at Libya also, once one of the richest nations in Africa, with free healthcare and educations and programs to promote agriculture and business ownership. It's now freed by Western coalition forces. What does that mean? It's descended into chaos with widespread terrorism, and African slaves are literally being sold in open markets for $400 a piece, with a third of the population now in poverty. But at least they're free now, right, guys? So you can understand why the real people of Xinjiang, not these phony activists, are saying, keep your goddamn hands off of Xinjiang. I'm going to wrap it up here, guys, but, I just want everybody to stay alert. Demand more logical, observable evidence when the accusations are this big and this grand. Ask for more than just testimonies, many of which are attracted and encouraged by millions of dollars of funding per year, and ask for more than documents with shoddy translations and massive assumptions and questionable origin. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.